Hello chess enthusiasts and welcome to my YouTube chess channel. Well, if you like to play Slav Defense as black, this might not be the best video for you because I will show you a game in which white literally destroyed black playing Slav Defense. Nice game between Grivas and Braun playing in a famous Wijk tournament in 2008. Let's see what happened. Grivas had white pieces and he started with d4, d5, c4, c6, Slav Defense naturally. And more or less standard moves followed: knight to f3, knight to knight to f6, knight from b goes to d2, bishop goes to g4, knight goes to e5, attacking bishop on g4, bishop goes to f5, and now e3. Well, maybe knight from b to d7, immediately targeting this knight on e5 would be the best option, but no, e6 was played. Blocking this bishop on f5, so white immediately uses this opportunity. g4 was played, bishop goes back to g6, and now h4, preparing this h5, trying to trap this bishop on g6. So black plays d pawn captures on c4, bishop recaptured, and here black has created an escape square on d5, and again knight from b to d7, targeting this knight on e5 would be the best option, and of course bishop on g6 would be still protecting this knight on f7. You will see immediately why this is important. Black played bishop to e4, attacking rook on h1, that's true, but here white strikes with a nice knight sacrifice. Knight captures pawn on f7. So both queen and rook on h8 are attacked. Black has no other option but to capture, so king captures on f7, knight captures bishop on e4, knight recaptures, and queen to f3 check. Knight goes back to f6 defending, and now g5, taking knight on f6. Knight cannot move because it's pinned, so sooner or later white will gain a piece back. Black continues with bishop to b4 check, king goes to e2, so white also lost the right to castle, but that's the least of white's problem. Knight from b goes to d7. You might wonder why not capture immediately. Knight on f6. Well, let's see. If g-pawn captures on f6, queen recaptures. Black forces the trade of queens. Of course, in this position, white still has the edge, but mating attack for white is now gone. So white keeps the tension. a3 was played, attacking bishop on b4. Bishop goes back to e7, queen goes to f5, pawn on e6 is pinned by the bishop, so cannot capture queen on f5. White prepares to capture pawn on e6 and later mate on f7. Still in this position, maybe the best option for black would be simply to play king to e8. Of course, white would capture pawn on e6, threatening to mate on f7, but then knight to d5 would follow, and then this diagonal would be blocked. Now this is a very sharp and double-edged position, but probably white would try with e4, attacking knight on d5. Knight on d5 naturally cannot move, or there is mate on f7. I don't know, maybe knight from the 7th rank could go to b6, bishop back to b3. Again, very sharp and double-edged position. White has a slight edge, but I cannot go through all the variations now. Though this would probably be the best option for black. In the game, knight goes to f8, protecting this pawn on e6. White continues with g-pawn captures, knight on f6, gaining the piece back. So bishop recaptures on f6, bishop goes to d2. And now black plays queen to b6, targeting this pawn on b2. White doesn't care. h5 was played, preparing h6, further harassing black king on the king side. Of course, black cannot capture pawn on b2 because then simply rook from h would go to b1, and black queen is trapped, and white gains decisive material advantage. So in the game, rook to e8 was played, further reinforcing this pawn on e6, bishop goes to b4. Now white has gathered all of his pieces to attack black king, and maybe black would try here with queen to a6. After this move, if for example bishop captures queen on a6, there is no pin anymore, and e-pawn can capture queen on f5. Of course, bishop then captures pawn on b7 and is probably going to capture pawn on c6 too. Yeah, black would be 2 pawns down, but still he could try his chances and try to draw the game in the end game. In the game, a6 was played. Rook from a goes to g1, preparing to strike here at g7. You might not realize, but black is in serious trouble. If, for example, black plays a random move, let's say queen to c7, then we would have rook would capture pawn on g7 check. Of course, bishop is pinned, so there isn't any option other than king captures rook on g7, and then rook would go to g1 check. If king would go to h6, simply bishop would capture knight on f8 check. After rook from e would recapture, we would have rook to g6 check. After pawn, h-pawn would recapture, queen recaptures, it's checkmate. And if king would go back to f7, then bishop would capture knight on f8, preparing this rook to g7 strike. If, for example, black plays a random move, let's say a5, rook to g7 check, king captures on f8, queen captures on f6, and it's mate in the next move. If, of course, king captures bishop on f8 immediately, queen captures on f6 check, queen, of course, can only defend on f7, but then queen captures rook on h8, and white has decisive material advantage. And if rook from e captures on f8, then queen to e6 is checkmate. And the last option, if rook from h captures on f8, then queen captures on h7 check. Bishop defends on g7, but queen captures on g7 is checkmate. Okay, so in the game, black plays rook goes to g8, defending this pawn on g7. White continues with rook to g3, preparing to double the rooks along the g file. Queen goes to d8, rook from h to g1. Maybe still here black would try with g6, because after g6, even if h-pawn captures, h-pawn recaptures. Now queen is attacked both from e and g pawn, so queen can be captured, and white would have to be very careful how he should remove the queen and continue the attack. Of course, I cannot go through all the variations, but this is one of the possible options for black. But in the game, black makes a last and fatal blunder. Queen goes to b6, and now simply white plays h6, and black is more or less done. If black plays a random move, let's say a5, simply we have rook captures on g7, rook recaptures, and rook recaptures is checkmate. If black tries with g6, we have a nice queen sack, queen captures bishop on f6, king recaptures as there isn't any other options, and rook to f3 is checkmate. And if, for example, black would try with g5, creating additional escape square, then simply bishop would capture knight on f8. Let's see, if rook from e recaptures, then queen to e6 check, king to g6, rook captures on g5 check, king captures on h6, and queen to h3 is checkmate. If, for example, rook from g captures on f8, simply queen captures on h7, bishop defends, and queen to g7 is checkmate. And if, of course, king captures bishop on f8, queen to f6 is simply checkmate. And if black doesn't do anything and plays the random move, let's say a5, again we have a nice queen sacrifice. Queen captures bishop on f6 check, king recaptures, rook to f3 check, king to g6, bishop to d3 check, king to h5, and rook to f3 would be checkmate. And realizing this, in this position after h6, black simply resigned the game. So, I hope you liked this video, I hope you have learned something from it. If you have any questions, my email is below in the description. Of course, I invite you to visit my Instagram page. That's it for now, and see you soon.